We have another video tutorial about the branches of philosophy. The branches of philosophy. Here we want to try and to break down philosophical principles, break down philosophy into more understandable concepts. And there are branches or categories of philosophy. In this tutorial, we are going to talk about the three main branches of philosophy that we can further subdivide into 5. But from other scholars, you can find out there are even more types of categories or branches of philosophy that are still being propounded and coming up. But in adult education, we usually talk about the 5, but I'm going to talk about 3. Then I'll show you how we can subdivide those 3 to produce 5 branches of philosophy. Why do we do that? We want to try and understand, or to try and break it down so that it becomes easy for our understanding of philosophical principles in adult education. Right, I'm going to start presenting the that I've designed. The explanation of these concepts will become easy. This is the conceptual framework that I'm talking about. In this, we have 3 categories as shown in the diagram: epistemology, metaphysics, and axiology. Epistemology is the philosophy about knowledge. It presents questions regarding the nature, the scope, or the dimensions of knowledge. Then we also have metaphysics. In other books or literature, you can find metaphysics is the same as ontology. Metaphysics is the philosophy of reality. It presents questions regarding the nature, the scope, or dimensions of reality. Then the third category is axiology. Axiology is a philosophy category that is concerned with values, ethics, or standards of behavior. Right? In our presentation, you can see here we have ideas, beliefs, perceptions, knowledge about the truth and about reality in this relationship between epistemology and metaphysics. And between epistemology and the axiology, we have knowledge about right and wrong, good and bad, evil, justice and equity, correct thinking or reasoning. Then here between metaphysics and axiology, we have standards of behavior and correct thinking, belief systems, values, appreciation of beauty and nature, appreciation of things like art and music. Right. In this diagram, these are the 3 categories of philosophy or branches of philosophy. And here we are trying to explain the relationship that is between these categories. Right. As I said, epistemology presents questions about knowledge and how we know things. And metaphysics presents questions about reality, and axiology presents questions about values or ethics. So the interaction between epistemology and metaphysics determines how we know. The nature of reality determines the things we know, how we know about those things. The values and ethics determine our conduct, determine the nature of knowledge that we are pursuing after. Right? So there's an interaction, there's an interchange between these categories. We can subdivide epistemology we can subdivide axiology and produce aesthetics, another category that can stand on its own. That is the values about beauty, appreciation of nature and beauty, right? So let's break these categories bit by bit, one by one, starting with epistemology. What is epistemology? The philosophy of knowledge. It presents questions about knowing, the way of knowing. It presents questions about whether we know using our sensory capacities or our senses, or by observing the objective reality, the observable reality in the world, or we know by testing and measuring through empirical sciences or the natural sciences to produce empirical evidence, things that we can see, feel, sense, right? It also presents questions about the nature of knowledge, that is abstract knowledge, intuitive knowledge, logical reasoning. And we can also subdivide epistemology and produce another category that can stand on its own, which is logic. How do we come to know the things that we know? Maybe through reasoning or through logic, right? Yes. So whether we know using our sensory capacity and our senses by observing, testing, and measuring through empirical sciences, or we know by experiencing or trying to explore the experiences of those that claim to know something, that claim to know a particular phenomenon, or we try to explore their feelings about phenomena, right? That is the philosophy of knowledge. It is related to reality because the reality determines what we know. How do we know that these things are real or not real? How do we know? How do we arrive at such knowledge? How do we pursue that area of knowledge to determine whether things are real or not? They are observable or material forms. The observable reality, and there is a subjective reality also, abstract or immaterial forms beyond the empirical world. Things that we have no experience of using, experience of through our senses, things that we cannot see, things that we cannot feel, things that we cannot touch, things that we cannot even hear. But there are those people who claim that such things are real. For example, ghosts, angels, the existence of God. Right. How do we come to know about such immaterial forms? So when we are asking those questions, we are in the category of epistemology, the philosophy of knowing, the philosophy of knowledge. Right. It is a philosophy regarding the nature of knowledge. How to know? What do we know? How can we know? Right. Epistemology is a philosophy that is concerned about the truth, knowledge, reason, or intuition. Epistemological questions ask if humans can truly know something or can only work with a set of opinions. For the things that we claim to know, do we really know, or we are only using a set of assumptions or opinions and we claim that we know? Is there a boundary to the things that we know or the things that we can know? Are there other things that are hidden from our knowledge? And when we claim to know, do we really know that we know? Or maybe the generations that are going to come after us are going to disqualify all our standards of knowledge, the things that we claim to know. Maybe they are going to discover new ways of knowing, new ways of pursuing knowledge, new ways of discovering the truth. And they are going to disqualify the things that we claim to be true right now. So is there a boundary to the truth? Are there hidden things beyond our sensory capacities? What is the truth and how do we know it is the truth? How can we verify the truth? Are there any boundaries to knowledge? Are all truths knowable, or there are other things that are hidden from our knowledge? Or there are other things that we are never going to know? So how can we conduct ourselves in the pursuit of knowledge and wisdom or truth? These are epistemological questions that will be asked forever. Questions will keep on cropping up, coming up. Then metaphysics is the philosophy of reality. It presents questions about the nature or scope of reality. It is the philosophy that asks about being, the nature of being, the nature of existence. It asks questions about reality. Then it looks into the dimensions of reality, because reality is several dimensions. There's the dimension of the observable world, things that we can see, feel, and touch. We know that these things are real because we see them. For example, the desk that I have here, it's real. I can see it, I can touch it, I can feel it. It's real. But there are other things that are beyond my sensory capacity, that are beyond my senses. Things that I cannot see, things that I cannot feel, things that I cannot touch. But there are also people who claim that such things as ghosts, as angels, are real. Now, how can we verify this reality? How can we explore? How can we testify? How can we share? How can we interact with this reality? When we ask all those questions, we are in the category of metaphysics, the philosophy of reality. Some of the questions that are asked include, what things are real? Are there other dimensions of reality that is seemingly obvious or beyond the sensory capacity? Are there other dimensions of reality than the seemingly obvious or beyond the sensory capacity? Then maybe possibly we need to rope in these traditions, the interpretivist and the positivist tradition, right? These traditions, for example, the positivist tradition or positivism looks at the observable world, the tangible world, the world or the reality that we can verify through natural sciences. Then there's an interpretive dimension where we need to explore the reality using the experiences, or trying to understand the experiences, emotions, feelings, beliefs about the people around such phenomena. For example, the example that I gave about ghosts. Some other people believe in ghosts. Some people do not believe in ghosts. Why? For other people, it is simply because they've never encountered a ghost, they've never seen a ghost. For some other people, they've encountered ghosts, they'll tell you their experiences. But for some others, believe in ghosts because they trust the sources they interact with in connection or in relation to ghosts. There are theories A, B, C, D about ghosts, and people using logic now, they can trust those sources and verify that ghosts are real. Is all reality observable, testable, or measurable? This is the positivist dimension that I was explaining about. Then the other category is axiology. Philosophical principles about forms of behavior, rules about conduct, how humans should behave. And why are we concerned about behavior? Because behavior of human beings, or the actions of human beings, influence or interact with reality. Our behavior in some way shapes reality or influences reality. or it is influenced, or it is shaped by reality. It is also influenced by the things that we know, by the capacity of knowledge, or by the quest of knowledge or pursuit of wisdom. What things do we value? Values about right and wrong, good and evil, good and bad. Then there are theories that question the nature of reality, or of values. Let's say about ethics, the rules that govern human conduct, the do's and don'ts. Then who is the judge who should say behave in this way and do not behave in this way? Society or communities agree on patterns of behavior. But what if someone comes and asks, who should say I should behave in this way and not behave in that way? What if I want to behave this way? Why do you think this behavior is bad or evil? Because the society has certain standards of behavioral expectations, certain standards of the ways of human conduct. Then the teleological and deontological perspectives are theories that question whether we should stick to those values, or there can be circumstances or situations in which we are expected to, in which we can be excused to violate the ethical principles, in which we can be excused to break the law, as long as the goal or objective is good. For example, you are a student. You want to pass your examination. Can you be excused to cheat? Or by no means, you should not cheat. Someone would say, but I wanted to pass. Yes, the goal is good. But the rules of conduct will not allow you to cheat. The teleological and deontological view. Teleological view is looking at the end result and not necessarily concerned about the means to those objectives. But the deontological pathways is focused on the means, on the methods to achieve certain objectives. So when we are concerned so much about the means, then it means we are stuck with our values. We should by no ways violate or break the laws of conduct. We should get to our goals. We should attain our goals through ethical conduct. Values of justice and the common good for society. We were talking when we were studying about Freire, Paulo Freire, equity and social justice. Marxism, they talk about equity and social justice. Who is the judge about equity and social justice? What are our values concerning equity and social justice? When we ask all these questions, we are in the category of axiology, the philosophy of values. Then there are values of beauty, appreciation of beauty and nature. This is another category that we can come up with, the aesthetics. How do we appreciate beauty, music, and art? Another person likes a certain musician who is hated by another person who likes another musician who is hated by this other person. So what determines our appreciation of beauty? What are the standards of beauty? What are the standards of good things, good life, smartness, smart environment, environmental conservation, all those issues come into play when we ask questions about values or aesthetics. Right. Let me now try to summarize what we've been talking about before I move on into the applicability of these principles in adult education. Nature of resources for teaching and learning is determined by these philosophical principles, either principles about values, about reality, or about knowledge. The relationship of teachers and learners is governed by these principles, the standards of teaching and learning. Now let's look into these issues in greater detail when we apply this to adult education, starting with epistemology. The nature of knowledge determines the sources of knowledge, teaching and learning methods, as well as the standards of effectiveness. So we are talking about the sources of knowledge, delivery methods, and standards of teaching and learning. Right? We were asking questions about the nature, dimension, or scope of knowledge. Right? According to a particular philosophical standpoint. For example, we have the liberalists, the behaviorists, the humanists. What are our sources of knowledge when we are talking about liberal education or humanist education or progressive education? Where do we derive the objectives of knowledge? Where do we get the sources of knowledge? Where do we get the knowledge from? For example, according to liberalism, we may build libraries, canonize our knowledge and content. And for example, the Great Books program, right? Those are our sources of knowledge. Teachers, experts in the field are our sources of knowledge. But what about in progressive education? The environment itself is the source of knowledge. What about in humanism? The problems of society are the sources of knowledge, right? Standards of teaching and learning. This relates to issues of evaluation. How do we evaluate learning from a particular standpoint, from a liberalist point of view or from a behaviorist point of view? According to behaviorists, we want to see action, observable behavior. We can only certify that people have learned certain skills, attitudes, and a lot of things through the way they conduct themselves, through behavior, right? But according to liberalists, if people pass examinations and tests, yes, the goal has been achieved. So what are we saying? We are saying the nature of knowledge from a particular philosophical point of view determines the sources of knowledge. It also determines the delivery methods in teaching and learning. It also determines the standards of teaching and learning, or the standards of effectiveness in a learning transaction. Various philosophies hold different epistemological beliefs about the nature of knowledge. Epistemological beliefs of the liberalists are different from those of the behaviorists. These differences spare different methodological approaches in adult education, right? The behaviorists, the humanists, they advocate for different approaches to adult education. Why? Because of the belief systems or ideas or assumptions about knowledge. Yes. Then let's talk about metaphysics. How can we apply these principles of the nature of reality in adult education? The nature of reality and the methods of verifying reality also determine aims, goals, or purposes of adult education, as well as methodological approaches thereof. Similarly, the nature of reality and the methods of verifying reality also determine aims, goals, purposes of adult education. as well as the approaches to adult education. Beliefs about reality or questions about what things are real also guide knowledge acquisition processes and the pursuit of knowledge. Right. Philosophy is a set of principles, ideas, beliefs that inform practice. Branches of philosophy help practitioners delineate or break down the abstract principles into meaningful categories. For example, if I would ask you that from the first and second presentations, what take-home points can you give me or articulate or outline? It may be difficult because we're talking about philosophy in general, philosophy as a whole. But now we're trying to categorize or to break it down so that we talk about those principles with regards to knowledge, talk about principles with regards to reality, then we talk about principles with regards to values or ethics. These branches help us to look closely at different philosophical thought concerning the purpose of education, the sources of knowledge, and other methodological approaches to adult education practice. So when we are looking now at these issues, this is how we apply these principles in adult education. What am I saying? I'm saying being an adult educator, some of these things are the things that you'll be concerned with, are the things that you'll be doing. So you apply these principles by trying to match or link the principles to some of these issues, to purpose of education, to sources of knowledge, to approaches in adult education, to the relationship between the teachers and the learners, to standards of effectiveness in education. When you do that and explain each particular principle with regards to a certain category here or factor here, then we know you can apply these principles in adult education. Safe to take them into practice. This is the end of the presentation. I hope you have enjoyed the presentation. Thank you so much. Meet you in the next presentation. God bless you.